Hello, I'm checking to see if this is actually going live. I haven't seen it go live on my phone yet, but it says I am live. So maybe there's just a little bit of a delay. Um, See if anyone joins. Let's see. Okay. Yeah, so it seems like there's a little bit of a delay. All right. Well, I just had a little bit of time. Um, just finished watching the Logos Project and its interview with Dr. Tracy Rowland, which I thought was great. So just thought I'd hop on here, see if anyone had any questions or wanted to just interact a little bit. I know I don't do much on here lately, so thought I'd just take the opportunity while I had some time. Not sure. There we go. So if you can type in the chat, see who's on here. I see there's about 4 people on here, 5. So, yeah. You guys have any questions, or did you guys, any of you see the interview with Dr. Tracy Rowland on the Logos Project that just aired? I thought it was really good. Thank you, Lou G. Appreciate you being here, especially with literally 0 notice. So glad you can make it on here. Who else do we have? Did anyone actually catch that interview? I thought it was a really good interview with Dr. Tracy Rowland. I was sorry to hear that you missed it. Khan lives. Now, is that, oh yeah, that's a reference to Star Trek. Okay, yeah. I initially in my head, I was thinking of Oliver Kahn, the goalkeeper from the German national team way back when. Let's see. James Ciprell, or Ciprelle, says, hi, Dr. Decloux. We exchanged a few emails a while back about the natural desire for the beatific vision. What are your current thoughts about the debate surrounding it? Let me just put that out there so people can read it. Yeah, that's a great question. Oh, and thanks for your appreciation for my Vatican II series. I'm glad you enjoyed it. It was it's a very interesting one. Very interesting one indeed. So I really enjoyed doing that series, but it was a lot of work. I thoroughly enjoyed it, and I thought it was important. I continue to think about the natural desire for the beatific vision stuff a lot, but I just keep thinking about it, just keep going over the same things in my head over and over again. I haven't really been able to do any more research on it. And the more I delve into it, though, the more confusing it gets, because it seems like the two positions are much closer than I had initially thought. Let me come back to that real quick. Shout out to Benjamin Handelman. Good to see you. How do you know this is the real Dr. Decloux? Well, because fountain pens are the only real way to write. And, you know, that's, if I was an imposter, I probably wouldn't know that. And I can prove it with my Pilot Custom 823 right here, my Visconti Homo sapiens Bronze Age, my Pelican M1005 Stresemann, and a couple of Mont Blanc pouches, which you would appreciate as a Mont Blanc man. No, I still don't have any Mont Blanc pens, but I hope that proves it. So it's interesting. I attended, for the first time recently, I attended an ordinariate mass, an Anglican use mass. And it was pretty awesome. And then we decided to go to the next one they had a couple weeks later, and afterwards they had like a potluck, and we got to talking about the nature and grace question. Um, and yeah, it's very complicated. So what do I think about it? I do think that the neo-Thomist position has some good points to it, but I'm I still tend to think that de Lubac got it right. Now he might have gotten certain points wrong or misunderstood certain things. Like he does seem to misunderstand obediential potency and misses a critical distinction in that. But I don't think it affects his overall position. So when it comes to nature and grace, the I think it's pretty clear that Aquinas' position is that we have a natural desire for the beatific vision, and there is no other final end that we have, and it's hard for me to see a way around that. Um, I don't think that the fact that God creates human nature with a natural desire for the beatific vision means he owes it to human nature. De Lubac denies that he owes it. He doesn't think God owes any beatitude to any creature, no matter how natural it is. So, um, and another reason I think that is because they try to appeal to the notion of the debitum naturae, the debt of nature, the debt owed to nature, which is a more of a philosophical concept. But if you push them hard enough on it, they'll admit that it's not really, absolutely speaking, and something that God owes to the creature, strictly speaking. It's that because God creates a nature in his wisdom, he kind of owes it to himself to provide for that nature, at least in some instance, meaning not every instance of a created nature has to attain it, just some instance of the nature has to. So they'll even admit it's really just something he owes to himself, even when we're talking about natural ends of creatures apart from humans. So, um, one, it's just an axiom that's thrown out there. I don't know if you can prove it. It makes sense in a way. You're saying, well, God wouldn't create something um, with a final end that it just never will attain. But again, that really comes from Aristotle. So, and his notion was nature does nothing in vain. That was his thing. But it's something he's observing, and he's just thinking that that's the case. But anyway, my point is that even in the neo-Thomist position, like when you press it, they admit, well, no, it's not really a strict matter of justice that he owes anything. So I just don't think it can really be used against de Lubac either. Yeah, I mean, so those are my current thoughts on it. I think I'm still trying to wrap my head around the distinction, because this is part of it. Again, if you press them on it, because de Lubac's main position is that, one, there's a natural desire for the beatific vision. Two, we can't attain that beatific vision without the aid of grace. Three, that it's still owed, or I'm sorry, that it's not owed. So grace is still freely given. So where was I going with that? Sorry, my brain's not running on all cylinders this evening. So I don't see how de Lubac's position is problematic theologically, meaning it doesn't go against faith at all, and it seems to correspond quite a lot with the fathers, and I think many parts of Aquinas. So I think he's. Oh yeah, that's what I was getting at. So that's his main position, is their natural desire for the beatific vision, which Aquinas himself explicitly says on multiple occasions. Now, then you get someone like Feingold. What they'll press is the notion that, well, yes, there is a natural desire, but it's not innate, it's elicited, and it's not efficacious. Well, as far as I know, I never saw de Lubac say that it's efficacious, because the desire itself doesn't fulfill anything. It needs grace to be fulfilled. So, also, but this distinction between innate and elicited natural desires is confusing to me, because the word innate means something that's natural. It's inborn. That's what innatus, innate. It's inborn. It's all that means. So it seems like, to me, it comes across as a fabricated distinction without a difference. I'm not even sure. I'd have to go back and reread de Lubac, but I'm not even sure if he specifies what kind of natural desire it is. I do think it's a desire of the intellect, not a desire of the will. And I was happy to see that, what's his name? I think it's Brian Mulati. Father Brian Mulati says the same thing in his presentation on the question. And I was like, oh, good. I'm not alone. I'm thinking that way. But so their distinction seems a little bit fabricated, and I don't really see much of a difference, and I don't see how it really makes a difference, because the idea behind the elicited desire is not just that once God reveals this, then you have the desire. It's that once the mind comes to know that there is an uncaused cause, a first cause, the natural knowledge that God exists, it wants to know the divine essence. That's what Aquinas says very explicitly. But that is the natural end. If that's the end of human knowledge itself, is to come to know that truth, then it's still part of the nature anyway, and it's still innate to the intellect to come to that conclusion. I mean, otherwise you'd say that all of our desires are in some sense elicited. I mean, you might argue that, well, I'm hungry before I know if there's a thing called food. I guess my stomach grumbles, but so if you want to say it's not, the desire doesn't come until we recognize that there's an uncaused cause, all right, maybe, but that's something we should all come to if our nature is living properly, because that is the natural state of the intellect, is to come to that conclusion. It only doesn't because of the fall. Also, I did think of this with regards to debitum naturae, because the principle is that nature doesn't do anything in vain, meaning that all nature's essences should have at least one or some instance in which the end of that nature has been fulfilled, meaning not every individual creature of that nature has to attain it, but at least some creature of that should attain it, so that the nature as a whole has existed for the purpose and attained the purpose for which that nature exists, even if not every individual does. Well, here's the thing. If you take the Franciscan position of the absolute priority of Christ, in other words, that the question of whether or not there would have been an incarnation without the fall, which I tend to lean towards that view as well, that Christ himself would be the one instance in which human nature would attain the end for which it was created, and therefore would satisfy even the debitum naturae issue. Now, again, that's not something owed, but if that was God's plan from the beginning, you could even say that he fulfills that position with no other creature needing to have it attained. That as long as he gets it, then that's that. So, all right. So, oh yes, Benjamin. I thought I told you I had this, and I guess maybe I didn't. The Pelican. So Daniel, the act of creation must be free and not caused, otherwise there's no agential creation, just a sequence of events. Yes, I agree with that. There's no question about that in the Lubach either. I don't think anyone denies the act of creation, and de Lubac doesn't deny the freedom in the act of the recreation either. He just thinks it's part of God's plan from all of eternity and from the beginning. So, I mean, final causes are connected to essences. And the final cause of human nature, the reason for which it was created, was the beatific vision. So there's one ultimate end, and that's that. And Aquinas very explicitly states that there is no perfect natural beatitude, that natural beatitude would always be imperfect, because by nature, we want to know the essence of causes, including the first cause. But we can't know the essence of the first cause by nature. It requires grace. So even if all of our natural faculties are perfected without talking about grace, even then it would be imperfect, because there would be a desire to know the essence of the first cause, which is the beatific vision. But it would not be attained, and that desire would never go away. And that's Aquinas. So that's where I tend to lean on that question. I just think de Lubac's getting at a point that's fundamentally true. And Tracy Rowland mentioned in that interview that she just had that Guardini wrote about this in even more explicit and blunt terms than de Lubac, and no one jumped down his throat, and he did it 10 years before de Lubac. So I thought that was I had never heard that before. So I'd like to read Guardini on that as well. Let's see. Any thoughts about the German bishops causing such trouble in the church? Yeah, I think it's troublesome, and it's really obnoxious, to be honest. I mean, it's sickening, to put it bluntly. And it'll be interesting to see whether and when they'll finally back down. But they're being rather stubborn right now. So I don't know. We'll see. All right. So who else do we got? Everyone can just type a little note in the chat and see who's around. That would be nice. And if anyone has any questions or comments, that would be appreciated. Sorry for the rambling on nature and grace. I was trying to figure out how to talk about the parts that I've been thinking about lately without doing a complete rehash of the whole thing. Germany already has Protestants, is, I believe, how the Pope phrased it a while back. That's funny. I did not see that, but that's actually a good retort. Let's see. Anybody else have any questions, comments? Okay. Good call, Jacob. Yeah, you don't want to text and drive. It's not a good idea. So yeah, that's true. Let's see. So it says we have about 12 people. I'm probably one of them on my phone, so there's probably 11 other people here. But not that many have entered in the chat. If anyone can, please do. Just always good to see who's around. If anyone has any particular questions, or if you caught the interview with Tracy Rowland, if you had any thoughts on it, comments, follow-up questions. I thought it was a good interview. She definitely knows her stuff, that's for sure. What are your thoughts on debates? What are your thoughts on debates on theology, like the recent Portland Horn one? I did catch that. I don't catch all the debates that happen. I did catch that one. I think I'm kind of two minds on it. I used to like debates a lot more than I do now, probably. I think they're still important. I like the way that Trent Horn puts it, which is that he thinks it's a way of starting conversations, not ending them, even though the audience typically will just wants to see one side thrash the other. It's almost like a gladiatorial games. Um, but um, I I find it interesting. I still like watching debates, especially if it's a topic I don't know much about, and it's a good way to see what different people think on a topic. But I also, at the same time, recognize how limited they are because one, the way it's structured, it's you don't know what the guy's going to say in advance, except based on your research of what they've said before. So you don't always exactly know how they're going to do it, which means you aren't able to prepare like well thought out responses. You're trying to do it on the fly. Um, and you often can't cover everything because people in debates always throw out things that it would take hours to go through, but it takes them 3 seconds to bring up the point, and it's rhetorically that makes it sound like, oh, if you don't answer this, then you lose. When in reality, it's like, no, there's simply not enough time. So that I just sort of recognize the the limitations of that. I thought it was a good debate insofar as I actually thought that Ortland did better than I expected. And if I'm just talking about Ortland and I'm not talking about um, whether or not he beat Trent, I'm not saying that. I'm just saying I appreciated the way he presented the topic because it was kind of a new way of hearing Sola Scriptura presented. So I thought that was somewhat interesting. I still just have a hard time even fathoming that position at all. Um, so, um, sorry, I'm just looking something up. Let me make sure. Yeah, I can't read that whole thing right now. Anyway, I did think it was a good debate. He presented some interesting stuff about it, and he's one of the most respectful Protestants I've seen. So I enjoy watching him just because he's a legitimate nice guy. He's not a jerk. Very even keeled, and he seems to me like a sincere seeker after truth, and that I really appreciate about him. And of course, Trent Horn is always on point with his logical arguments and debate strategies. So I thought he did very well also. Let's see. I think they can be ways of starting conversations, not ending them, but in the end, they are usually what the audience wants because they are too short. Yes, they are. I tend to like long form conversations. I I haven't done debates since college. I used to love it. I was in an argumentation debate course, and I used to love it because I would turn the other sides. They would bring up points and I'd say, "Oh, I'm glad you brought that up because it proves my side," and completely turn the tables, and it would make them so mad. But probably shouldn't be taking delight in that as much as I did. But I really enjoyed it. But I haven't done them since then, and it's just not something I'm that interested in myself because I do tend to like more conversations, and partly because it helps keep you on the same part of the question at the same time instead of this person doing 10 topics and then you doing 10 and there's like overlap of like 3 to 6 of them, but then you didn't really address all the same things the other person. And then so I like the discussion because it helps focus. And you can begin the discussion with separate presentations first and then have the discussion. So there's overlap with like a debate format, but I tend to like discussions more than debates. Um, Dave Rebel 11, go. Maybe. That's actually what I was looking up. I wanted to make sure that I had the right thing in mind. And think I was thinking that you were talking about the part about um, revelate the revealed for our salvation question, but I wasn't sure. Yeah, there it is. Yep, that's exactly what's in there. Okay. So anyway, I think it's answered by the relatio very clearly to that question. In other words, before the bishops voted, there was a relatio given by the drafting committee that said, by this phrase, they did not mean to imply any material limitation to inerrancy, or so it wasn't meaning. It was just saying formally that all of Scripture was written for the sake of our salvation. It wasn't saying only those parts that were written by for the sake of our salvation. So the relatio itself, which was informing them before they voted on it, I think clears it up that it didn't mean to limit scriptural inerrancy. Is the Latin Mass finally dead in your opinion? I hope not. That's all I'll say. I would like to see, though, more Novus Ordo masses done in Latin, and in the way that would be the closest analog to the traditional Latin Mass that you can find. I think that would be the best response we could have right now, and would go a long way to healing a lot of issues. But I have a lot of love for the traditional Latin Mass. So, but I at the same time, I will say that every single point that Francis raised in his motu proprio, I have to admit are real concerns, because I had already spent years trying to combat those very things. I mean, a lot of my early theological YouTube stuff was precisely going after rad trads for their misrepresentations of the council and things like that. And I hate to say it, but it might not be everywhere, but it is a very common experience in my experience. There's a lot of that going on. So I can't pretend like his reasons for it aren't valid, because the reasons are there, whether or not you'd agree with his approach to how to handle it. It is a real problem, and it just seems all it's done is made the rad trads double down, which is not helping. But I would like to see, whether or not the traditional MS goes away, I'd like to see the Novus Ordo be ubiquitously celebrated in a way more similar to that. And even in Latin, which is perfectly allowed and called for by Vatican II. So why not? Could you explain negative theology? I mean, yeah, I mean, in a nutshell, apophaticism is basically it's the notion that because of the analogy, the principle of analogy, that anything we affirm of God, this is the Thomist position, anything we affirm of God and of the creature, we can only affirm analogously, meaning there's always a greater difference, because God is not just a being among other beings that shares qualities with them. So when we say that this thing is good or that thing is good, we don't mean it in exactly the same way we are predicated of God. We mean it in a similar way, but not perfectly univocal way. So negative theology kind of is about, okay, well, you're talking about what we don't know in a certain sense. Like there's always a sense of the totally otherness of God, and recognizing his complete and utter surpassing of everything that we know through human experience. So let's see, are there any other questions or comments? Did anyone that's joined so far see the interview with Dr. Tracy Rowland on the Logos Project this evening? Just curious if anyone was able to catch that. It was a good one. If y'all want to know more about me to go in more into the nature grace stuff, I will, but I did do 2 videos on it already. Or at least on to Lubach on that. But I can always just kind of, I can go on that for hours. Although I'm noticing that seeing myself on the screen is making that more difficult to concentrate. Oh, you might. So if you don't see it posted, one thing I noticed that's changed is that the live streams used to go under your videos. So if you clicked on videos, you would see everything, including live streams. That seems to have changed on YouTube, and I never got a notification that that was happening. So even on my channel now, for instance, if you go to my channel and you click on videos, I think the last video it shows is a book recommendation, but I did an interview with Timothy Flanders a week or 2 ago. And you have to go to live. You can't just go to videos anymore. You have to go over to the other tab to the right, and it's live. So you have to click those, and then that comes up with all of the live presentations. So you might want to try going to the Logos Project and then go over to live, and it might be there. Or it's still buffering because it's been so soon. But okay, well, I'm not sure why it's not there. Con lives. Yeah, I don't know. That's strange. I wonder if I can pull it up. Let me see. See if I can find it on the Logos Project. Yeah, no, it's not up. You're right. Maybe it's still buffering, or he doesn't have it saving it after. I don't know. That's interesting. Do I think that suppressing the Latin Mass will actually help resolve the rad trad problem? I don't know. Honestly, I don't know. I don't know if it will help or not. It also might depend on what one thinks help means. You know, it was a real look. It was and is still a real problem, and I'm sorry. You know, for about 2 years straight, I was going to the TLM about 90% of the Sundays. So I'm obviously in favor of the traditional Latin Mass, but you know, I think the TLM communities do have a lot of blame in this. As you said in your other comment, it seems like rad trads often know almost nothing about the liturgy and hold the strange beliefs they do because of bad ecclesiology. Bad ecclesiology, and it sounds strange, but bad formation in many cases. And they just repeat the same taglines they've heard from the same trad camps and stuff like that, and they don't really actually have education in the liturgy and the history of the liturgy, and neither do I. I'm not a liturgist. But all it takes is, you see one article or a few articles that repeat the same tired quotes, some of which are dubious, actually, like the quote about Schkielebeck has been misrepresented, and so has the reference to Ottaviani's microphone being turned off. They let the guy talk for much longer than his time limit before they shut it off. It wasn't like they just turned it off and laughed because they didn't like what he had to say. He was warned, his time was up, and they let him go on for like double the amount of time he was supposed to. And if you're in a council with over 2,000 bishops and you let each one of them go over their time, it's gonna be a problem. So he wasn't following the rules set out for the speeches. Like that's why it got shut off because he wouldn't stop talking. It wasn't them being mean. They cheered because they were like, he's just going on and on. It wasn't, I don't think it had to do just with what he was saying. It was because he wasn't following the rules. Um, but at the same time, I think the rad treads also have a lot of legitimate concerns and a lot of legitimate complaints. And because those are often not addressed, that leads to more anger and more frustration and more seeking after other alternatives. And so that kind of feeds the mentality as well. I think if some of their legitimate concerns were addressed, that would help solve the problem. So, I do think that in many ways we need to understand where they're coming from because I have the same concerns and they're often not addressed. Um, let's see. It's a form of Gnosticism. Yeah, kind of is. I mean, in a way. I mean, although they usually point to written texts and not some secret knowledge, but there is that air of, oh, we're the true church kind of thing. And that is bad ecclesiology. It doesn't make any sense. I'm sorry. Wait, there's another section called past live streams? Is that what you're telling us, Benjamin? Is there yet another one? No, I'm not going to look it up right now. It's out of order. That's weird. You're at a stoplight. Okay. So you're justifying it. Appreciate that. One difference seems to be that when the concerns are addressed, they're dismissed out of hand. Now that's actually a good point because a lot of times they'll scream and rant about like certain documents of Vatican II or something. Then you can they'll actually get angry at you if you point out that the post conciliar magisterium already answered that question in their favor, saying, no, that's, when they're saying, oh, well, it could lead people to think this. And the magisterium has said, no, that's not what it means. And it can't mean that. And here's what we actually mean, which would affirm, you would hope what the trads would want it to affirm. And they just get mad that you pointed it out and call you, all sorts of names for actually, you'd think, this is where I get upset because if you really loved the church, you wouldn't be mad that the magisterium actually faithfully defended a council and showed its authentic meaning to be an orthodox one. Why does showing that make you mad? And the only reason can be is that in somewhere inside of you, you want the council to have said something wrong and heretical or theologically erroneous. Because if you're mad that the church has clarified it to be an orthodox position that you thought was open to other interpretations, why would you be mad? You should go, oh, thank goodness. Like there should be relief that the church did that. And instead, when I point those things out, I mean, some people appreciate it, but you still do have those ones that they get mad and still try to say, well, it doesn't matter if that's what they said, it's still ambiguous and blah, 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 blah. You're like, well, then nothing will satisfy you because the clarification is not ambiguous. So, they still want to dismiss it. So that's a good point. And that goes for a lot of issues on Vatican II that they raise. Like even when you show them how to make sense of it, they just get angry and dismiss it. So good point. Oh, that's funny. My favorite example of talking to a rad trad was a person upset in 2021 when the bishops in the U.S. had the priests sprinkle ashes on our heads instead of draw crosses. It is interesting because if I'm not mistaken, that is the tradition in Europe, is to sprinkle. I don't think there's anything in the rubrics that specify drawing crosses. I think that's actually is the tradition in some places. Yep. See, they ranted about how it wasn't tradition. I pointed out it actually was the older way. The person said, "Well, I didn't grow up doing that. No man across the sea can tell me what to believe." Okay. Well, then you can't be Catholic, and especially if you're a rad trad, that's a very strange thing to say. Yes, red trads are very divisive and sling back at you constantly, and I do not think many of them have read the documents. Yeah, I think you're right. A lot of them haven't. Uh, Vatican II racked the church. I think you mean wrecked. Sorry, you can't see the damage it did to our church. Look, I've done an entire series on Vatican II. Well, I did some videos on my channel. I have a whole 6-part series on the Word on Fire Institute. Although this channel and Word on Fire are not related, but it's on there. Authority and continuity. Look, I've been through this so many times. There's the council and there's things that happened after the council, and they're not always the same thing. And the same thing can be said of so many other councils, including the very first ecumenical council of Nicaea. So it's simply not true. The problem is not the council itself, the documents of the council. Now, a lot of things that have happened since then have been very problematic. And a lot of that has to do precisely with the liberal progressives pushing their Spirit of Vatican II stuff that had nothing to do with the documents of the council, which in some sense proves that the council was more correct, because what they did was bad, and that's been proven, and it's also not what the council said. So it doesn't disprove the council that you had people misrepresenting it causing damage. If misrepresenting the council caused damage, yes. Also, there was a huge cultural revolution in the late 60s, that was going on everywhere and wrecked a lot of things, not just the Catholic Church. It was not like this was somehow statistically limited to the Catholic Church, which is what you would expect if you want to say it was Vatican II itself that wrecked it. So I just don't agree with that. And the way it was taken, yeah. Yes, there's been a lot of damage, but again, that's begging the question what the cause of the damage is. I think now you could say a lot of damage has been the failure of the hierarchy to implement the council properly, and that's a legitimate thing to say. And much of the damage was also caused in Catholic higher education, which was run by liberal progressives that were training all of the priests and the bishops, honestly. So the academy, I think, is where most of the problems came from. The academy hadn't, and by the way, the academy was already headed in a bad direction before the council. So there was already a lot of this stuff going on in seminaries and stuff beforehand. It didn't start with the council. A lot of the bad academic stuff was already in the works. Have you ever heard of E. Michael Jones? Yes, I've heard of him, but I really don't know anything about him. If it was Vatican II, why did all the mainline Protestant churches fall to liberalism to the exact same time? Western culture virtually collapsed in the 60s and 70s, and that led to a lot of these problems. Yeah, exactly. That's a huge part of it. And there's also, I think, a misunderstanding of how good the church was before the council. It was not. I mean, you know, Ratzinger back in, I think it was 58, wrote an article called "The New Heathens" or "The New Pagans in the Church," and he basically argued that we were a church of pagans because we were dispensing sacraments to people, but they really didn't believe, and we weren't holding them accountable to the expectations of what comes with being baptized and married in the church and all of that. And that was leading them to think that they were Catholics when in reality they were pagans. And that was back in the 50s. So, I mean, his assessment of the situation back then was that even in the church, he said it was a facade. It had the appearance of being a cultural force, but inside it was full of pagans, de facto pagans. So it wasn't like, and I've heard a lot of these stories too about the way Mass was celebrated back then. I mean, we think the traditional Latin Mass, the way it's celebrated in a traditional parish now, is the same way it would have been celebrated if you went back to the 1950s. It's simply not the case. One, the reason people are doing the traditional Latin Mass now is by choice, not just that's what we're supposed to do, including the priests. So they're putting a lot more intentionality into it. I mean, masses back then could often be very rushed. Daily masses often used the Mass for the Dead, the Requiem Mass, because it was shorter. The priests were mumbling and speeding through the prayers because you couldn't hear them anyway, so how could you tell? But no other way could it be done in that amount of time. They weren't always done reverently. There were problems back then. So, those problems are already starting. Just check out some of his works. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know much about him. I've heard him. I think he's the guy with the bow tie, if I'm not mistaken. Don't really know much about him though. Is E. Michael Jones connected at all to like the New Polity movement, or am I completely off base there? Because I know some about those guys. I went to actually. So when I mentioned earlier that I went to an Anglican or the Ordinariate Mass recently, it was actually offered at a retreat center after a presentation by Jacob Imam, whom I just learned finished his doctorate recently. So he's Dr. Jacob Imam. I had not realized that. Oh, I'm thinking of Andrew Willard Jones. Good point. Okay. Who's the other guy? Mark Barnes. So Mark Barnes and Jacob Imam gave a really, really it was a conversation. The two of them just kind of went back and forth talking about right use of money, and I thought it was phenomenally well done. So, but yeah, that has nothing to do with Michael Jones, so never mind. I was thinking of someone else. But is E. Michael Jones still the guy with the bow tie? Or is that also Andrew Willard Jones? I don't know anything. What is E. Michael Jones? What's his shtick? Like, what's his area? Like, I don't read anything by him. Dr. Declue threatened us if we didn't go watch your latest live stream. Yeah, that's true. Well, people were saying they couldn't find it, that it wasn't showing up when they went to search it. And maybe it just took a while to buffer. Yeah, I'm still not seeing it on there. When I go to Logos Project and Live, it's still not showing it, but somehow Benjamin has the magic words, the magic key to find it, because he was able to find it. But no one else has been able to see it up there. Playlists, maybe? No, I don't see it there either. I don't know. I still don't see it on there. So YouTube's doing weird things today. Oh, that's he's known for some very prominent views on Jews. Okay, I will admit this. I have very little tolerance for anti-Semitic rants. It that gets my blood boiling, and unfortunately, that is a very big problem in trad communities, or in some. I don't think it's that is not as universal as some of the other issues, but I do encounter it there, and it really, really irritates me. I don't have much. Um, I don't have like any. um, that makes me very angry. I'll just put it that way when I see that kind of rhetoric. But someone please type in those. Is E. Michael Jones the guy with the bow tie? That's all. I have a picture of a dude with white hair and a bow tie. Like, is that the person? Well, even though you had to reschedule the after you have the live stream, it should still populate. And we're not. I mean, Benjamin is able to find it when he goes to your YouTube channel. None of the rest of us seem to be able to. I don't know why. Okay, let's see. Jason Rose. What I have never been able to understand is what exactly the Red Treads want in a new council. Yeah, I don't know. I think they just wanted to say that Vatican II doesn't count, which, by the way, would be completely untraditional and unprecedented for an ecumenical council to say another council is now abrogated. So, like, talk about not being traditional. But I mean, the Steelman argument would be that they would want it to clarify more clearly certain positions. Um, Apparently, there had been a suggestion by someone at the council that there should be two sets of documents, one for the masses, meaning the people, and one for like the hierarchy, and like to be more of a magisterial thing, and whether there could be some value at them doing some simple like anathemas or positive statements of doctrine, like we are to believe this, we are to hold that, we are, you know, the teaching is something like that. Oh, okay. So you're saying he's not anti-Semitic? Okay, well then I don't know. I don't know anything about the guy, but I'm glad to know that yes, he's the guy with the bow tie. So at least I knew who he was, but I literally have no idea what he does. I don't know if he's Catholic or not. I don't know if I associate him with political stuff, but I could be wrong. Okay. Trying to see it. I think I missed some stuff, so I'm just going back and trying to see it. I did go to lives though. Look, I don't see something called live streams. I just see something that says live, and I click on that, and the last one it says, oh wait, maybe no, the last one you have an upcoming one with Salza, and then the Ecclesia blog. Those are the top two when I go to live. So I don't know. Yeah, I mean, I guess it does. Although, I mean, it's also German, right? A lot of those Jewish names are also German names. Welcome, Jacob. Glad that you're glad. By the way, one of my favorite YouTube channels is starting its stream like right now at 9 o'clock. Um, I don't know whether or not I should plug that channel, but it's it's called the Y Files. It's just a really fun. They do a lot of. He started out doing like some more science-based stuff in shorts, like information, but then he does these fun things on different like conspiracy theories or like aliens and government stuff. But he tells the story in a really compelling manner, and then at the end, he'll kind of tell you, "Oh, well, this part I've been able to debunk. That's not true," or well, we haven't been able to debunk this, and or yes, this part seems to be true, and it's kind of cool how he does it. And he's got this fish in a bowl that has a tinfoil hat on top of it, and it talks throughout the whole thing. So he calls him Heckle Fish because he heckles, and they always upload on Thursday nights at 9 Eastern. So anyway, I'm interested. I'm gonna go watch that soon. So Lou G says it's there on Logos Projects channel, but you have to scroll. It's not on the top. But that's, I don't know. I still don't see it. I mean, I'm scrolling like all the way down. So I don't know. Apparently YouTube is not acting the same for everybody. Or maybe I have to go out and go back in. Maybe it needs to catch up. Nope, still not seeing it. Oh well. I don't know. I watched it live, so I'm good. But I'm just trying to figure out why this isn't the same for everybody. You think the official theology of Roman Catholic Church denies freedom of conscience? I think that the issue with freedom of conscience question is not a matter of whether or not it denies or affirms it. It's a matter of what does that mean? Because only then can you talk about whether it denies or affirms it. It doesn't deny freedom of conscience, but it's saying that freedom comes from following a well-formed conscience, that truth and freedom go together. They're not opposites. And so you can't, your conscience doesn't let you do anything that you want despite you knowing what the truth is, or despite knowing what God actually commands. So the freedom of conscience issues doesn't mean like that's what it would reject. That's what it would deny, is that, I think Dr. Levering has a book. I think does he have a book on conscience? I know he's got one coming out on doctrinal, not development, but the other side, doctrinal corruption. I thought he did something on Newman and conscience recently too, Dr. Levering. He's done a couple interviews lately. But the issue is modern contemporary people are pushing freedom of conscience in ways that are not compatible with Catholicism. That's the issue. So yes, there's a certain, the conscience in reality is supposed to be like, it's like an aboriginal vicar of Christ, I think is how Newman put it. But it's basically telling you, oh, well, I shouldn't be doing this or I should be doing that. And then whether or not you're listening to it is another question. It's not, well, I want this to be the case. So my conscience says, like, people appeal to conscience when they're not really talking about conscience. They're talking about what they want to be the case. So that's a big problem. But it doesn't, your conscience to be well informed. So you're supposed to be learning, it's supposed to be informed by the truths of our faith. So if you're informed about the truths of our faith, you can't say your conscience says to do something different, if that makes sense. So conscience can't go against truth. So listeners, you want a clarification on religious liberty. If you haven't seen my 6-part series on authority and continuity, go check that out. I'm still studying the religious liberty question. Well, it's not my main focus of research or writing or anything. So when I say that, I mean tangentially. Um, I like Dr. Thomas Pink, who, if you can look up Thomas Pink, religious liberty or religious freedom. I forget which. I think it's liberty. And he has on his academia page, he's got a number of articles he's written on it, showing continuity on that question. So especially for trad, I recommend that. The Authority and Continuity series on the Word on Fire Institute channel deals with it a little bit, and I bring Pink in. Now, there's another book that's come out since I did that by a guy named Dunnigan, who I think did it for his doctorate in canon law dissertation. And he apparently takes a different take than Pink, but I haven't read that yet. So that's why I say I'm still looking into it. What I mean is I know of another serious scholar that's written on it that I haven't been able to read yet. And I probably won't be able to read anytime soon because, one, I can't afford books, and two, I've got so many other projects of my own to do. But basically, man is called to seek the truth and to adhere to it insofar as it is known. Because there is the obligation to seek the truth, man must be free to seek the truth. So you can't hinder him from doing that. You have to allow him to seek that truth, which does require that he be allowed to do that. So the issue with religious liberty, first of all, is not saying that man is free to just hold whatever religion he wants. That's not religious liberty, and that's not what the church teaches. It's not what Vatican II teaches. Religious liberty doesn't mean a liberal approach to religion. So it's not religious indifferentism. What it means is there's an obligation to seek the truth and adhere to it, which requires the freedom to be able to seek the truth so that you can adhere to it. And that truth is ultimately the Catholic faith. So one thing to keep in mind is that a lot of the people pushing the document of religious liberty, Dignitatis Humanae, were Eastern Catholics living under the Iron Curtain, places like China, Russia, Eastern Europe at the time, and who had governments that were prohibiting religious freedom of Catholics. So it's partly addressing that, because if you note, the document says that it's saying that there's religious liberty with respect to secular states. So the civil government has no right to interfere with your religious beliefs and practices, except insofar as they would go against justice, for instance. So, in other words, you can't just claim, well, my religion says I can kill people and steal. So, yes, my religion, you can't do that. And it says basically that. So within due limits. But it's saying that it's the secular state, civil authority, does not have the authority over you in that regard. So you have religious liberty there. Now it also says that just read if you haven't yet, read Dignitatis Humanae first of all. Like, don't just have questions without. It's a very short text. You can Google it. It's on the Vatican website, and it's very short. So it says, and Pope Paul VI himself demanded this be inserted into the document, where it says that the traditional teaching about what individuals and societies have towards the true faith and the true church is still affirmed. I forget the exact phrasing, but that's basically what it says. So that nothing that it's saying goes against the traditional teaching regarding the the duties of individuals and societies towards the true religion. So, but it's basically just saying that, yeah, as a matter of human dignity, you have the right to seek the truth and to adhere to it insofar as you know it. And that means you have a freedom from, basically you have a freedom from coercion from a civil government, is what it's saying. Civil government can't force you to not or to believe a specific faith or prevent you from believing or practicing another faith. Let's see. Oh, yes, you're right. That is true. Dom, I don't think you need to fix anything. I did think YouTube just needs to catch up. I think maybe it's just still buffering after the end of the stream. I don't know. Oh, Jimmy Akin. Yeah. Yeah, he has a similar channel as the Y File. So I watched Jimmy Akin as well. Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World is a great series. Jimmy does a little bit differently. So I do watch both of them. Jimmy is much more longer format. This guy does shorter videos usually, but they're really high production quality because he has a background in production. Um, I don't know if I completely agree with this, Joseph. I understand what you're saying, but the point is the church can have more like intra like hierarchical if they did some things that were a little bit more complicated or more at a higher level or more precise level or legalistic level in some sense for internal use that they could use for implementing things that might make it more clear to them what they're supposed to do. And then the way you communicate that would be through the other documents. Yeah, maybe it would defeat it. Maybe but that's why you would have the two, so that you're still conveying the part to the people. That it wasn't. You don't want to get me started on the Neo-Scholastic Enterprise because I have pros and cons to it. I do think there were limits to it. That's why I like Ressourcement. But let's face it, getting rid of the Neo-Scholastic Enterprise did not do us much good. And I still think the Scholastic Enterprise is a very valid one and shouldn't be bashed as much as it has been. Even if I do think it needs to be complemented by the theology from like the Ressourcement movement with a more patristic style. But I don't think the point of the council was to get rid of scholasticism. It itself didn't want to speak in that style because it was meant for the masses of people and not specialists. That didn't mean that theologians themselves shouldn't continue doing scholastic work. I think we've lost a lot of treasures by not reading the scholastics and even some of the neo-scholastics, even if I do think there's some limitations and I tend to prefer the style of Ressourcement people on the whole. But I don't think we should just get rid of scholasticism. And the neo-scholastics were orthodox. Let's at least give them that. And a lot of the people in the universities afterwards were not. Let's see. Do I think Rauner's theology had taken a turn for the worse as he got older? Okay, I can't say personally because I'm not one that typically, as I'm reading people, take a lot of note on when each thing was written. So I can't say that I've done it. I've read his works in chronological order and noticed changes. but I know others have. Like Dr. Levering talks about that. So he has more of a sense of when he wrote which things, and he seems to think that he did lean got worse as it got older. I do think if you haven't seen it yet, I did a video on why I don't completely despise Ronner, which is kind of a funny title, but it's like why I don't completely despise him, because I actually read a lot of him to good effect. I thought he had a lot of brilliant things to say, um, and is more conservative than a lot of people give him credit for. Now, Ron Arians, people who followed him are often nuts. Now, Levering agrees that he's a genius and that he's worth reading for theologians to read. But he seems to have more of a negative view, especially with regards to the later Ronner. So my guess is he probably, I mean, I read a lot of Ronner, I'm not going to lie, but it sounds to me like he's read more because he'll reference things I don't remember ever coming across. So I think I would probably trust his assessment of that more than my own. I think most of Ronner's stuff, at least the stuff that I hear get brought up most of the time, is bogus. Like, I think they're misrepresenting him. Like, his anonymous Christian thing is not nearly as problematic as people think once you actually listen to what he's saying. He even admitted the term was bad. So he's like, he couldn't come up with a better one. So, but it's probably true because, I mean, he apparently was very influential in the liberal progressives. So there must have been some connection there. I tend to read him in a more conservative way, perhaps, or, I mean, I've even had some people that are very orthodox that knew Ronner tell me that he was much more conservative than people think, agreeing with me. But again, I don't know. Maybe I'm just not as familiar with his later works, and that's why I have that impression, which is totally possible. So that could be. I do think he was brilliant, and I've said this, and other people have said this as well, that he's in some sense one of the last of the German scholastics, because his theology is much more like the neo-scholastics than the ressourcement communia folks' theology is, which is interesting because he's more of a scholastic than they are. Yes, it would be nice. That's why, it would be nice if people read the documents. I wish someone would do a Vatican II in a year type of podcast. Well, I did. Word on Fire was doing a series of reading challenges on the documents of Vatican II. So far, one of them has been released, but I don't know if you have access to it unless you might have to be an institute member now. I know it was open to the public when it came out, but I don't know, do a Google search for Dei Verbum Reading Challenge and see if you can find it, because we had that available, but I think we had to send people the links in email. So I don't know where it's now residing on the web, but there was a Dei Verbum Reading Challenge, and I don't know. I know another one's been recorded. I did the Dei Verbum one. I don't know. I know another one's been recorded, but I don't know if and when it'll be released. But hopefully that will continue. But the reading challenge came with weekly reading assignments, and then you had an introductory video at the beginning of the week, and then a summary explanatory video at the end of the week. So that was something that similar to what you're talking about. Yes, the Logos Project has a couple of videos in the council. We'll be making more. That's good to hear. What are the differences between Calvinism and Reformed doctrine? First of all, I will say this. I'm a Catholic theologian who studied Catholic systematic theology, so I don't know much about Protestants. I know some about Orthodox theology because of my STL work was in that realm of Catholic Orthodox dialogue. I don't know much about Calvinism and Protestantism in general. My understanding is that Reformed doctrine is Calvinist. That Reformed, when you hear Reformed, that means Calvinist. That's my understanding. Now, maybe there's some distinctions where they're Calvin leaning, but not completely Calvinist. I don't know, but that's my understanding. I could be wrong, though. Not my area. Some understand dignitatis in a univocal way. The state ought to oblige true religion with power. It's analogical. True religion is obligatory based on the authority of the truth and freedom. Yeah. Okay. Well, I guess I need to get going here. Anyway, the Diaz brothers be killing you. Would you ever fight one of them? I don't know who that is. Are you talking about like Nate Diaz and his brother that fight in the UFC? If they attacked me, I would fight back, but I don't. Is that who you're talking about? I don't know who the Diaz brothers are. Anyway, I got to get going. It's been good hanging out for a little bit over an hour. And sorry for the abrupt end, but it's time for me to go. And anyway, yeah, thanks for coming out. Appreciate all the questions, and God bless.